The Kiseibya were a parasitic species of metal-eating life forms bred on the planet Bliss by Professor Toshiro Shimura and designed specifically to combat Daleks. During the Dalek Wars, the Rourke 279 research facility was established by humanity on the planet Bliss, and there the researchers worked to combat the Daleks by developing weapons and studying their weaknesses. However, Professor Shimura decided that the best way to combat Daleks was to design a species that would become their natural predator. Shimura recognised that, galactically speaking, the Daleks were positioned at the top of the food chain, and he intended to dethrone them from that position by crossbreeding silkworms and piranha locusts to create the Kiseibya. Shimura understood the highly dangerous nature of the creatures that he had bred, and intended on containing the initial specimens until his researchers could find a way of breeding out the Kiseibya's violent anti-human tendencies. In theory, the crossbreeding of metal-eating silkworms with the piranha locusts would create a life form that could feed on metal, specifically Dalekanium. However, the initial specimens retained much of the piranha locust's flesh-eating traits. Shimura's research was interrupted, however, when a Dalek attack threatened the facility. Shimura released his specimens early, allowing them to feed on his researchers, which in turn allowed them to breed new Kiseibya. Around the same time, the 7th Doctor, Ace and Hex arrived, and this coincided with the last survivors of a nearby human fleet, a Valkyrie unit made up entirely of female soldiers, making landfall on Bliss. Shimura desperately tried to cover up his atrocities, even going so far as to reprogram the resident medical droid, but his attempts to turn the 7th Doctor to his way of thinking eventually gave him away. Shimura admitted to allowing the brutal deaths of his colleagues, arguing that the imminent Dalek attack would have killed them all anyway. In his eyes, their use in breeding the next generation of Kiseibya gave their deaths some meaning. Disgusted, the Doctor was genuinely unsure as to how to proceed. He knew that the Kiseibya were a threat that could potentially surpass the Daleks, and he seemed to genuinely pity the Dalek attack force who were ripped apart by the newborn Kiseibya specimens. He felt particular pity for the Black Dalek, whose casing had been devoured by the Kiseibya, who laid their eggs inside the mutant to provide the hatchlings with a fresh source of food. After the Valkyrie unit and the remaining Rourke personnel were killed in the crossfire of the Dalek-Kiseibya conflict, the Doctor agreed to help the Black Dalek activate its self-destruct system, which would obliterate the Kiseibya once and for all. Professor Shimura would eventually meet his fate at the hands of his own creations, offering himself up as a food source for the next generation of Kiseibya. But by this point, the maturing specimens had begun to assimilate aspects of human speech and reasoning, and understood that their creator was superfluous, disposing of him in much the same way that the Daleks had done to their creator, Davros, centuries before. The 7th Doctor pointed out that the creation of the Kiseibya bore a striking resemblance to the creation of the Daleks themselves. Both species were created as weapons of war, as a radical attempt to turn the tide of a seemingly unwinnable conflict. Both were created by brilliant but deranged men who put their twisted ambitions above the immediate needs of the people they claimed to be trying to protect. And both creators ultimately met a horrible fate at the hands of their own creations. While Shimura had attempted to train the Kiseibya to obey him, even teaching them traditional Japanese lullabies in an attempt to calm them, the 7th Doctor also pointed out that he seemed to know what he was doing from the very beginning. The word Kiseibya translates to parasitic saviour, implying that Shimura understood the potential danger to mankind that his creatures posed, despite his insistence that the Kiseibya were humanity's saviours. This likewise parallels Davros's ideas of the Daleks, which, once created, rendered the Khaled species superfluous in his mind. It's unfortunate because, despite their innately dangerous and uncontrollable nature, the Kiseibya proved to be fairly effective at combating the Daleks of that era. The newborns made short work of a Dalek squad, including ripping up its commander, after trapping them in an ambush. Their ability to eat Dalekanium made them a fearsome threat to the Daleks, but they were still vulnerable if caught out in the open. And ultimately, the long-term viability of the Kiseibya as a weapon against the Daleks is clearly tenuous at best. What do you think of the Kiseibya? Have you listened to the Big Finish audio Enemy of the Daleks, in which they appear? What's your opinion of Professor Shimura, and do you think we'll ever see the Kiseibya again in a future Doctor Who story? Let me know in the comments below.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe to
Dalek Bumps.